Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh Renaissance Fencing Academy here. In today's video I want to talk about how durable historical swords and other weapons were. In other words, how easy was it for them to become broken, either by accident or deliberately as a result of an attack targeting the weapon. Now, I do need to point out straight away that I am certainly not a metallurgist or materials scientist, so I can't give you this from a scientific point of view, as it were. So I'm going to approach this from the point of view of printed evidence. So texts drawn from treatises from historical periods and a little bit of artwork as well. I'm going to deal with swords first of all, and then I'll talk about polearms and other hafted weapons second. Let's get into it. Okay, first of all, a little general comment. So of course weapons could and did break in combat. And this obviously didn't happen all of the time, but it happened often enough that you can find it portrayed in certain pieces of period artwork. So if you take a look at the following images, and in particular focus on the ground at the feet of the combatants in these battle scenes, you'll see a few broken weapons lying around. These images are all from the Renaissance period. Okay, so let's now talk about swords. How could swords end up broken in combat? So I'm going to go through a small number of quotes from period written sources, and I'm going to start off with good old Giacomo di Grassi's treatise. And I want to read out a section which is from part of his chapter on sword and buckler combat. And in this, he's actually describing the design of an ideal buckler. So bear with me, this will be relevant. So he says, as for its size, the size of the buckler, the bigger it is, the better it will block attacks, but you need to take care that it not impede your view or that it do so as little as possible. In addition, it needs to have strong ring of iron around its rim, nailed on well and raised up from the buckler, since the enemy's sword may enter in between that ring and the buckler, so that you can bind his sword with it or break the tip off. This happens more often by accident than design, since no rule or sure knowledge can be applied to making such a bind or breakage, etc., etc. Okay, so first thing from de Grassi. The second one I want to talk to you about is actually from a military source rather than a fencing treatise. So this is an extract from a text written by an English military man, a soldier called Sir John Smythe, writing in the late 1500s, around 1590. And he's talking about rapiers of the time. And he says, rapier blades, being so narrow and of so small substance, and made of a very hard temper to fight in private frays, in lighting with any blow upon armour, do presently break, and so become unprofitable. Okay, so another instance of accidental breakage of a sword blade, this time contacting armour. Next quote is from the 1606 treatise of Salvator Fabris. So in this section he's talking about how to perform cuts with the sword, with the rapier once again. So he says that there are several different ways or methods of performing a cut. And the first way is delivering the cut from the shoulder. And this causes the sword to make a wide arc in order to fall on target with more strength, and is the worst of the four methods of cutting. It takes up too much time and gives the opponent opportunity to wound as you start lifting the sword, as you drop it, even after it has fallen for the cut. As it is not supported by the opponent's weapons nor by his body, your sword often ends up swinging all the way behind your back, since it can hardly be restrained in its arc. And if the cut is vertically downward, the sword may actually hit the ground, running a good risk of breaking. All right. And the last quote, for swords anyway, is from the 17th century treatise of Gérard Thibault. And this is from the section describing fencing between a single-handed sword, by which he means a rapier, and a two-handed sword. So this is from the point of view of the rapier fencer. So it says, we admit that he who tries to parry the blows of a two-handed sword with a plain sword, meaning a single-handed sword, will find himself deceived, and instead of a sword will find himself holding a dagger, which is his wry way of saying your blade will break, will snap, and you'll be left with something at the length and size of a dagger. Okay, so from these four quotations, what can we learn? In every case, the sword was broken by accident because of misuse by the person making an attack. So in one case, somebody's sword tip ends up stuck in the rim of a buckler, and then it may become broken. The tip may become broken. In another case, aiming a thrust with something like a rapier at a hard armoured target may cause the blade to break. Swinging wildly with your sword so that it goes out of control and hits the ground, or presumably some other hard object, could cause the sword to break. And then finally, if you have a lighter sword, trying to parry a big cut from a two-handed sword in the wrong way, basically with the weak of your sword just blocking this big blow, may result in your blade snapping. I should say in the case of that last one, Thibault does go on to explain that there is a good way to parry this, which is to deflect the blow, of course using the forte, the strong section of your blade, which is fine. So, in other words, swords are most likely to become damaged through misuse by a fencer. We should also note that there is no mention in any of these works of deliberately breaking an opponent's weapon by targeting it. I have yet to find a legitimate source that tells you to try to break your opponent's sword. It seems to be something that happened by accident through misuse. Okay, now let's talk about polearms and by extension other hafted weapons such as spears and pikes as well. What do the period sources have to say about this? So I'm going to return to Grassi's book to start with. And his section on polearms is quite interesting. So I'm going to read out a passage where he's explaining about how polearms are used on the military battlefield. And typically these are for taking on enemy pike soldiers, pike infantry. So he says, but for the most part, these weapons, polearms, are employed to enter among many pikes or other weapons to break and rout any order. Okay, so that's the tactical application of them. Now he starts talking about some techniques. So he says, once you've found your opponent's weapons, so that's contacted them, enter by advancing a step with your rear foot, simultaneously bringing down the partisan, halberd, or bill with as much fury as you can, striking with a cut across the pikes. This blow is so powerful, throwing it as you have to, since it goes from high to low and the weapon is very heavy, that it would not cut only pikes, but even stronger barriers. Okay, so it's talking about deliberately cutting the hafts of the pikes with heavy polearms. The second quotation that I want to read out in this part is from Achille Marozzo's treatise of the early 16th century. This quote is from the section describing fencing between a two-handed sword and a polearm, and this is from the point of view of the person with the two-handed sword. So there's a little combat sequence described here. The polearm opponent is going to open the exchange by directing a thrust at the two-handed swordsman. So it says, let's first suppose that he attacks above the belt with a thrust to your upper body. Be attentive and watch his haft, especially the upper third toward the head of his weapon, and especially the point thereof. And in the tempo in which he throws the said thrust to your upper body, cast your right foot forward a bit, somewhat on the diagonal, and throw a mandrito traversato cut across his haft, such that your cut falls into porta di ferro larga, which is a guard posture, and make your left foot follow your right. If he throws another blow, either high or low, assuming you haven't cut through his haft, then send your right foot towards his left side and put the true edge of your sword into his haft and parry his blow. Okay, so just from these two quotes, firstly, both of these sources are indicating that suitably heavy two-handed weapons, such as a two-handed sword or polearms like halberds and so on, are capable of cutting through the wooden haft of weapons like pikes and polearms. However, we can note from Marozzo's section that being able to cut through such a haft with a single blow may be possible, but it's certainly not guaranteed. It may be that over the course of an exchange, you may repeatedly strike the opponent's haft and it will eventually break. However, these types of targeted attacks are only described against the wooden hafts of polearms and similar weapons, and they're only described with heavy double-handed weapons. Okay, so let's finish the video with a quick conclusion from what we've learned today. Firstly, that swords could and did break in combat, but usually through misuse, through wild blows and bad targeting. I can't find any evidence for deliberately trying to break the opponent's sword as a technique, so that Hollywood or fantasy cliche of cutting through the blade of your opponent's weapon does not seem to be accurate. On the other hand, polearms and spears and pikes could be deliberately targeted to cut through the wooden hafts, only with sufficiently heavy-bladed, double-handed weapons. So that's what the evidence from the written sources tells us. Okay, hopefully that's interesting for you, as always, and I'll leave it there for today. Take care, everyone. See you again soon. Bye.